Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into a moment of history that it feels like the ultimate paradox of war.
It really does.
We're setting the scene right at the very end of the line, April 23rd, 1945.
Right. So the entire European conflict is hurtling toward its end. We know, looking back, it only has 8 days left.
But for the people living it, they didn't know that. That date was just another muddy, terrifying day.
And the setting is a cold, muddy field in Bavaria. The military machine of the Third Reich is just collapsing around them.
And the subjects of our deep dive today are the absolute final, most desperate conscripts you can imagine.
We're talking about 14 German boys, teenagers, and, well, preteens. They range in age from just 12 to 16.
12 years old. I mean, just pause on that for a second. 12.
Conscripted, dressed in uniforms that are way too big for their malnourished frames.
And now they're kneeling in the mud, hands on their heads, and they're expecting a quick execution.
Our sources describe the youngest one. He's trembling so violently that the cheap fabric of his jacket seemed to, vibrate, and there was no wind.
Wow.
Their indoctrination was just total. They had been taught since they were small children in the Hitler Youth that Americans were ruthless, godless monsters who were unbound by any rules of war.
So their deepest psychological preparation for this exact moment was the belief that surrender equaled torture.
And a guaranteed brutal death.
So the core mission of this deep dive is to explore that collision, the absolute collision between that intense, years-long conditioning and one single, simple, totally unexpected act of grace. These boys faced their American captors, anticipating the click of rifles, and instead, they received a hot meal.
And specifically, that hot meal was fried chicken.
Right.
We're going to analyze how that one decision, which was made by an American officer who was actively defying military procedure, how it just shattered a lifetime of propaganda.
And instead of killing them, that meal gave them the opportunity to, reclaim their humanity.
To reclaim their humanity and redefine their entire futures. It's a profound story about how these small acts of defiance against regulations can have this monumental 30-year legacy.
Okay, so let's start right there. In the mud, consumed by what one of our sources calls the kneeling terror.
You have 14 boys totally alone, and years of official state messaging is just playing on a loop inside their heads.
And our focal point is Theodore Neumann. He's 14 years old.
Right. He kept his eyes just fixed on the dirt. He was trying to find a specific blade of grass, a mud claw, just anything.
Anything to anchor himself to the physical world while his internal world was just dissolving into panic.
And Theo's experience, it really illustrates how deeply this kind of psychological warfare works. I mean, he wasn't just afraid of dying.
No.
He was afraid of dying unworthily. He'd internalized every single lesson from his teachers, his Hitler Youth leaders.
And they had used specific gruesome images, hadn't they? Doctored photos, really detailed stories.
Oh, absolutely. The goal was to convince these children that American soldiers mutilated bodies, that they tortured prisoners for information, and that they showed absolutely no mercy.
It sounds like this conditioning wasn't just, abstract talk. It was graphic, emotional, and just constant.
It was pervasive. Theo had been in the Hitler Youth since he was 10.
And at first, it was probably attractive, right?
Yeah.
Uniforms, camping trips.
A feeling of belonging, exactly. The promise of a future defined by German greatness. But as the tide of the war turned, the training sessions became less about camaraderie and much more about fanaticism.
So what did that look like?
They were practicing drills with these heavy, cumbersome weapons, like the Carabiner 98K rifle, fully loaded. It weighed almost 10 pounds.
Which is a massive weight for a 12 or 14-year-old boy.
A huge weight. And the message was simple. You are the last defense. Failure means the destruction of everything you hold sacred.
And you see this spectrum of terror manifest right there in the group.
Yeah.
Adizia Lang, he was 16, the oldest.
Yeah, and he had tried to maintain some semblance of military order during the surrender itself, walking out with the white cloth tied to his empty rifle.
But once they were kneeling, his composure just shaked. It failed completely.
He wasn't crying loudly. It was silent. His chest was shaking with these restrained sobs.
And he's thinking about his sister, right, back in Hamburg.
Yes. His tears were driven by this realization that transcended all the propaganda. The war was truly lost. His deepest worry wasn't his own fate, but his family's. In a city that had faced catastrophic firebombing raids just 2 years earlier.
He must have suspected the destruction was worse than the state media was letting on.
He had to. He already suspected that the scale of it was far, far greater than the censored newspapers had ever allowed him to believe.
And then you have the Hartman twins, Conrad and Leopold,
The babies of the group.
only 12, and they'd been in uniform for, what, 6 weeks?
Barely 6 weeks, they were still physically clinging to each other, praying silently. Their mother had desperately tried to hide them.
Moving them from one relative to the next.
Exactly. Hoping they would somehow escape the final ruthless call-ups for the Volkssturm, the People's Swarm, which was just scraping the absolute bottom of the barrel for manpower.
The fact that children this young were forced into uniform, it just speaks to the level of systemic desperation and just total collapse in 1945.
Absolutely. They had the identity of soldiers thrust upon them, but with no training, no supplies, and certainly no realistic hope of survival against American armored divisions.
For them, questioning the cause was, it was literally impossible. They had no alternate reality to even consider.
None. Every single trusted voice in their short lives, their teachers, the local party leader, their youth commander, had reinforced the exact same singular message.
It's an all-encompassing indoctrination, so even when the bombs are falling on their own cities, the message doesn't change.
No, the suffering is just framed as proof of the enemy's barbarity, and sacrifice is the only necessary path to this ultimate, glorious victory.
Which is why the actual moment of surrender was precipitated by what the source calls the betrayal of command.
This is a huge turning point. Just 3 days before they walk out, their own officers, they strip off their insignia, the eagles, the rank patches.
And they just disappear.
They just melt away into the Bavarian countryside, leaving these children completely alone to face the advancing Americans.
And this is where the foundation of Theo's faith in the cause, it suffers its first irreparable crack.
Of course. The adults, the brave men who had promised them glory and sacrifice, were running away to save their own skins.
We have a specific detail about an Obersturmführer Keller.
We do. An Obersturmführer is, it's equivalent to a first lieutenant in the SS. It's a high-ranking position for a youth commander.
So this wasn't just some instructor. He was a scarred veteran.
Right. And that scar, it ran from his eyebrow to his jaw. That was proof, in Theo's mind, of the enemy's savagery.
And this Keller, he dedicated entire sessions to describing American sadism. He insisted they had to die fighting because, quote, Americans take no prisoners.
Yet, when the Americans actually showed up, who was the first one to run? Keller. He abandoned his post. He ran away from the very enemy he claimed to understand, betraying the children he had indoctrinated and pledged to protect.
So that scar, once a badge of honor and a warning,
Mm-hmm.
now it just symbolized the lie.
And Berthold, seeing this ultimate abandonment, realizes the great cause is hollow. It's all hollow.
After 2 days hiding in a muddy barn, no food, just listening to the rumbling of American Sherman tanks getting closer, he makes the call.
He makes the executive decision. They would surrender. They chose the unknown fate of American captivity over the guaranteed death of fighting tanks with empty, heavy rifles.
And so they walk out. Hands raised, they're roughly searched, the Americans checking for concealed weapons, grenades.
They're herded into the field, ordered to kneel, and left there for what must have felt like an eternity.
30 minutes in the cold mud, just waiting for the inevitable execution they had been promised for years.
Every shift of an American boot, every loud, incomprehensible command, it just fueled that terror. Theo squeezed his eyes shut tighter, anticipating that rifle click.
He was waiting for the completion of the horror story he'd been told since he was 10 years old.
The conditioning was so complete that nonviolence, it just wasn't an option they could even compute. It wasn't in their framework of reality.
Okay, now let's shift our focus, because while that terror is unfolding on the ground, a profound moral conflict is boiling over just behind the American lines.
This is where we meet the man who would ultimately decide the boys' fate. Lieutenant Elliot Peyton, 32 years old.
And before the war, he was a corporate lawyer.
Yeah.
From Richmond, Virginia.
Peyton is the absolute embodiment of the crucial juxtaposition here. He was a professional military man, sworn to follow procedure, but his primary identity was that of a father.
He was constantly thinking of his wife, Caroline, and their son, Michael, who was 13.
Just slightly older than the Hartman twins, and Michael's worries were the worries of American normality.
Geometry homework, baseball practice.
Whether a girl named Sally would go to the soda fountain with him, that was his world.
And Peyton looked at these terrified figures kneeling in the mud, especially the 12-year-olds, and he saw, what, not soldiers.
He saw children. Children in ill-fitting costumes. They were malnourished, scared, and so clearly victims of circumstance, not ideologically driven soldiers. He saw the sheer injustice of their situation.
But the conflict for Peyton was immediate and really serious.
Oh, yeah. Technically, according to standing military orders, the boys were enemy
They were
combatants.
captured in uniform in an active combat zone, and they had been carrying weapons.
Right, and the regulations for processing prisoners of war, while they were comprehensive, they hadn't been written to anticipate the conscription of literal children in a dying fascist state.
So if he followed the letter of the law, what does that mean? He'd treat them as legitimate prisoners.
Right, potentially interrogating them, sending them through this dangerous, slow pipeline that was designed for adult soldiers.
And the risk of mistreatment or even execution along that pipeline was very real.
It was very real. And the thought of treating a 12-year-old like a veteran soldier was just, it was morally intolerable to him.
And there was the other unspoken but very real option, wasn't there? Summary execution.
Tragically common in the final, brutal days of the war. While illegal, it happened, especially when dealing with fanatical remnants or perceived threats.
So Peyton is staring down this decision that just pits his duty as a soldier against his morality as a father.
And that tension was broken by his right-hand man, Sergeant Lyle Whitmore, known to everyone as Cookie.
A farmer's son from Iowa, decorated veteran, Bronze Star recipient.
And he's the one who vocalized the moral defiance. He just refused, point blank.
He said, "Lieutenant, we can't just shoot children. They ain't soldiers, sir. I won't do it."
And then he adds, court-martial me if you have to.
That statement is immense. I mean, that's an act of public moral courage that really forces Peyton's hand.
It is. Cookie was willing to sacrifice his career, maybe face serious charges to protect these kids.
And that refusal, it just confirmed Peyton's deepest moral instinct.
He realized that if he followed procedure, if he allowed these boys to be processed as ordinary POWs, his wife, Caroline, who was a compassionate teacher, she would never forgive him.
And he wouldn't forgive himself.
He wouldn't.
And that's the moment. That's when Peyton made the order that completely defied all military logic.
He bypassed the entire system. He didn't order a transfer. He ordered comfort.
"Get the field kitchen set up," he commanded. "I want a hot meal prepared for these prisoners."
And he adds, something good. Something that reminds them they're still human beings.
What Peyton was attempting here was a deliberate, immediate act of counter-propaganda.
Delivered through the most primal medium possible, food. He needed to physically demonstrate that the Americans were not the monsters they were painted to be.
And the choice of meal was key. Cookie. He's remembering his grandmother's Sunday dinners.
And he starts preparing fried chicken.
Peyton insisted that the cooking be done right there, in the immediate vicinity of the kneeling boys. "Let them see it, let them hear it, let them smell it," he said.
It wasn't just about feeding them. It was about tearing down that psychological wall of indoctrination, brick by brick, using the sensory experience of domesticity.
This is where we have to introduce Private Raymond Nakamura.
Yes, who immediately understood Peyton's motivation on a level nobody else could.
Nakamura was a Japanese-American soldier. His family had spent 2 years locked up in the Manzanar internment camp in California.
Before he was allowed to enlist in the famed 442nd Regimental Combat Team.
The irony is just. It's so rich and profound.
It is. Nakamura served a government that had betrayed and imprisoned his family based solely on his ancestry, treating him as the enemy.
Yet here he is, being asked to participate in an act of deep humanity toward boys who were technically the actual enemy.
Nakamura just got it. He grasped that these German boys were innocent victims of political circumstance, much like his own family had been.
He understood what it meant to be judged by circumstances beyond your control.
And he immediately volunteered to help set up the field kitchen. He recognized this act as a declaration that humanity transcended official enemy lines. For him, it was a profoundly personal act.
Okay, so this is the critical moment. Where the physical reality collides with the psychological programming.
The boys are still kneeling, still anticipating the final horror.
And then the first thing that reaches them is a scent. Not exhaust, not gunpowder.
But the smell of hot fat, seasoned flour, and chicken skin crisping in a cast iron skillet.
That scent must have hit them with just unbelievable force.
Oh, the adrenaline and sheer terror that had kept their bodies rigid, that had suppressed any sense of hunger, it just vanished instantly.
And for Theo, his stomach clenched so hard it was painful.
And the smell triggered a specific memory. His mother's kitchen, Sunday afternoons before the war. A memory of security he hadn't even realized he'd locked away. It was the scent of absolute normalcy.
And Cookie Whitmore, he's treating this cooking not as a military duty, but as a ritual.
An actual sacred ritual. He carried that massive cast iron skillet all the way from Normandy. It was seasoned perfectly. He was meticulous about the lard temperature.
Dredging the chicken pieces slowly, making sure they were totally covered in the seasoned flour.
His grandmother's philosophy, passed down from the farm, was that good food was an act of love. It was a way of caring for people when words fell short.
And this wasn't standard, tasteless military rations.
No, this was home cooking. It was high-calorie, high-protein food prepared with intention, with care.
After months of watery soup and stale bread. Or nothing at all.
The nutritional impact alone would be staggering. The smell of frying fat, which is so fundamentally satisfying to a starving body, was just an overwhelming contradiction to the threat of immediate death.
The cognitive dissonance for the boys must have been total. I mean, they're watching American soldiers, the supposed monsters, setting up a cooking station.
Berthold whispered he was so confused. Why are they cooking?
The reality was so diametrically opposed to their deepest indoctrination that Theo genuinely wondered if the stress had finally broken his mind.
He thought he was hallucinating the smell.
Wow.
The smell was so potent that it triggered a purely emotional response in Theo. He started to cry before he even tasted the food.
Tears streamed down his face as he remembered the Munich apartment, the sound of his mother humming at the stove, the feeling of safety that had been erased by the war.
And when the food was finally ready, Lieutenant Peyton, he bypassed the usual procedure.
He carried the first plate himself, a heaping portion of golden brown fried chicken, right across the mud.
And he knelt in front of Theo, looked him straight in the eyes, and just said the one word Theo would understand. Essen.
Eat.
Eat. And Peyton knew he had to overcome their deeply ingrained suspicion. He couldn't just offer the food.
He had to prove it was safe.
So he reached down, took a drumstick from the plate, and took a large, deliberate bite, chewing slowly, looking right back at Theo. It was this act of profound trust, showing that the food wasn't poisoned, it wasn't a trick.
And Theo's hand moved, what almost without conscious thought.
Completely. The warmth of the chicken grease on his fingers was shocking, and when he took that first bite, the flavor, the salt, the seasoning, the protein, it just exploded across his tongue.
And he continued to cry while he chewed.
The taste wasn't just physical sustenance. It was a potent reminder of the life he had lost and the humanity he had been told no longer existed in the world.
And once Theo started, the psychological dam they completely broke.
Berthold and the twins followed. They ate with this kind of desperate, silent efficiency. They were feeding the starvation of their bodies and the starvation of their souls.
As the boys ate, the American soldiers sat nearby, eating their own portions.
They were laughing quietly, cleaning their rifles, looking like ordinary men on a break, not the demonic, ruthless monsters of propaganda.
The simple shared act of eating began to dissolve the rigid categories of war. Enemy, friend, German, American. The labels just blurred.
The threat of violence was physically replaced by the warmth of good food.
And Private Nakamura, recognizing this profound moment, offered Theo a small, gentle smile.
It was a silent form of validation. It was saying, I know what it's like to be treated as the enemy when you are just a child caught in the wrong circumstances.
That connection across enemy lines and cultural divides, it just reinforced Peyton's intention perfectly.
And Cookie Whitmore, the chef and the moral center of this whole moment, he moved among them, offering second servings. He showed only the quiet pride of a cook who saw his labor appreciated.
Respect, not judgment.
That's it. And Berthold, still bewildered, finally managed to whisper, why are they doing this? What do they want? And the only answer was that the Americans seemed to want nothing more than to feed them and ensure their survival.
So the physical and psychological transformation didn't just stop with the meal.
No, Peyton made another series of decisions that completely broke standard operating procedure.
He let the boys rest overnight, let them recover their numb, cramped legs,
giving them the necessary psychological space to process the complete collapse of their worldview.
And the care became deeply personal. Private Nakamura, the man whose family had been imprisoned, he took the first steps toward clinical care.
Right. He knelt beside Leopold, the younger twin, who had this small, festering cut on his cheek.
And using his own small medical kit, Nakamura carefully cleaned the wound, applied a fresh bandage.
And he just spoke the boy's name, Leopold, and his own name, Raymond. It was the first true, direct communication since the surrender, and it established trust through action.
And Cookie, still in that caregiver role, he treated Theo's frostbitten hands,
wrapping them in clean bandages and patting his shoulder with a simple, reassuring phrase, "You'll be okay, kid, just stay warm."
And Berthold, he managed a clear thank you in English.
These small acts were just so profound. They were saying, you matter. You are not disposable. You deserve to be treated with dignity.
The following morning brought the next symbolic transition, the changing of the uniforms.
Peden offered clean, albeit oversized, American fatigues. For the boys, changing out of their German uniforms, it must have felt like a betrayal.
A betrayal of their dead comrades, their indoctrination.
But at the same time, the uniform now felt hollow. It felt contaminated by the cowardice of their fleeing officers.
So Berthold took the lead again. He stood up, unbuttoned his jacket, and carefully, precisely, folded his uniform into a neat square.
Theo watched him, and he understood. It was a solemn goodbye to the identity that had been forced upon them.
And the American fatigues. They were foreign and strange, but they were clean, they were warm.
And crucially, they didn't carry the crushing ideological weight of their past. They represented a blank slate.
Later, as darkness fell again, the soldiers and the former child soldiers, they gathered around a small fire.
And the process of humanization continued through sharing stories. Peden opened up first.
He showed the boys the photograph of his wife, Carolyn, and his son, Michael.
And Theo just stared at that image of Michael. A boy his age, safe, worried about baseball, a world of complete, ordinary security he had entirely forgotten was possible.
Then Nakamura shared his painful truth. The years spent in Manzanar, being labeled an enemy by his own government.
But he chose to enlist and serve anyway. He chose to believe in the potential of America's ideals, not its failures.
And this parallel was absolutely essential for the boys to hear.
It was. They had been utterly betrayed and lied to by the state they served. And here was an American soldier who had also faced profound betrayal, yet chose to stand for a higher ideal.
Berthold and Theo, they started sharing their own stories. The excitement of joining the Hitler Youth to Belong, the subsequent horrors in Hamburg and Munich, the desperate need for community.
And around that fire, the rigid lines of war just dissolved into shared human experience.
But Peden knew that emotional healing wasn't enough. It had to be accompanied by a clear-eyed understanding of reality.
So the next morning, he shared the updated intelligence reports. And the news was just devastating.
And personal. Theo's home city, Munich, confirmed to be 70% destroyed by relentless Allied bombing.
Berthold's situation was even worse. Hamburg was devastated by firebombing. His specific neighborhood was confirmed to be annihilated.
And his family's names were conspicuously absent from survivor registries.
For these boys, their last remaining psychological anchor, the idea of home, of return, was just yanked away.
The Hartmann twins' village was now abandoned and deep inside what would soon become the Soviet occupation zone.
Though their mother was, thankfully, confirmed alive, displaced to a Red Cross camp near Frankfurt.
The emotional devastation was now complete. But Peden knew there was a final crucial step, the moral reckoning.
He needed to ensure their transformation was rooted in truth, not just kindness.
So he drove them, under escort, to a recently liberated concentration camp, about 15 miles away.
This was the moral climax of the entire narrative, and Peden didn't shield them from any of it.
The sensory horror was immediate and total. The smell, the stench of death and decay was so overwhelming that Leopold, the 12-year-old twin, immediately vomited before they even reached the camp gates.
They were forced to walk through the barracks. They saw the impossibly crammed bunks, designed for 50 people but holding 300.
They saw the mass graves, still uncovered, and the running crematoria, which the SS had tried but failed to fully destroy.
Peden insisted they look at the documentation. The stacks of meticulously organized, horrific paperwork kept by the SS detailing systematic murder. The sheer bureaucratic efficiency applied to genocide.
The evidence was just unanswerable. Theo's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees in the dirt and vomited again.
This time from absolute psychological shock, the scale of the regime's depravity was paralyzing.
And Berthold just repeated, "I didn't know," over and over again like a mantra.
But the sources suggest a deeper internal conflict was happening. While Berthold said he didn't know, he simultaneously realized that there had been whispers.
Rumors. Questions about where their Jewish neighbors had gone.
Exactly. They hadn't been explicitly taught the details, but they had all individually chosen the comfort of denial over the terror of investigation.
They had served a regime capable of this, and they had chosen not to see.
And Peden recognized the danger of allowing that horror to just become paralyzing guilt. So he offered them the ultimate choice.
A path forward based on responsibility, not destruction.
His wisdom was so clear. He said, you can let this knowledge destroy you, or you can let it transform you into people who ensure nothing like this ever happens again.
And Nakamura, who had experienced his own country's failure of humanity, he reinforced this.
He urged them to make Germany different, to take the chance offered to them and define themselves by their future actions, by their commitment to ideals that transcended nationalism and hatred.
So with their moral compass completely reset, the immediate practical question became, what now? What's their future?
The standard path was bleak. Repatriation, being processed as displaced persons in a ruined country, facing orphanages, the uncertainty of survival.
The alternative was immigration to the U.S., a complex process. It required American sponsorship, but it offered guaranteed safety and opportunity.
So the American soldiers immediately began training them for this new life, focusing on non-military domestic skills that reinforced their self-worth and purpose.
This was a new kind of training, completely antithetical to the rifles and the sacrifice they had learned before.
Theo started helping Cookie Whitmore in the field kitchen, learning the basics of food preparation.
Cookie taught him how to measure a batter for pancakes, how to test the griddle temperature with a drop of water.
And the moment Theo successfully flipped his first pancake, golden brown and perfect, Cookie declared he had natural talent.
Theo, that simple, tangible satisfaction of mastering a domestic skill, taught by a man who treated him with respect, that was a massive step toward rebuilding his self-identity.
Private Nakamura focused his patience on the Hartman twins. He helped them draft letters to their mother through the Red Cross. It was a slow, painstaking process.
In Nakamura's own experience of family separation in the internment camp, it gave him this immense empathy. He helped the boys articulate their message alive, safe, and ready to reunite with clarity and hope.
And Peyton focused on Berthold, recognizing his innate leadership and sense of responsibility.
Peyton discussed engineering and education possibilities with him. He reached out immediately to his wife, Caroline, in Richmond, Virginia,
to use her network as a teacher to find potential sponsors. And the idea of engineering, of building things, which Berthold had briefly dreamed of before the war, it just flickered back to life.
So the fates of these 14 boys eventually diverged, which really proves the success of Peyton's initial gamble.
The Hartman twins had the clearest route. They were safely transported back to Germany, and they reunited with their mother in a Red Cross camp near Frankfurt.
And both Conrad and Leopold went on to become teachers in post-war Germany,
dedicating their careers to ensuring that future generations understood the atrocities they had witnessed at the camp, fulfilling Peyton's challenge to transform the horror.
Berthold's future was the most structured, thanks to the connections Peyton's wife secured.
He was sponsored by the Henderson family, who were Quakers in Richmond. They specifically believed in offering second chances to victims of war.
And Berthold, he earned a university degree in social work,
dedicating his career to counseling and guiding other displaced European children. He was literally using his own trauma and betrayal to help others find redemption and purpose.
And Theo's path was more uncertain. His mother was never confirmed dead or alive.
So he accepted sponsorship from Peyton's sister in Georgia on a working farm. He completed his education and he maintained his ambition.
And he eventually became a successful architect, a profession focused entirely on building and creation, the complete antithesis of the destruction he had witnessed.
The long-term legacy of Lieutenant Peyton's decision is just. It's profound. 30 years later, Theodor Neumann, now a successful American citizen, returned to that muddy Bavarian field.
And he brought his own children with him, including a son he'd named Michael, after Peyton's son.
Theo's architectural focus became incredibly specific and meaningful. He specialized in designing and rebuilding churches and community centers that actively fostered German-American cooperation.
So he was working to bridge the cultural and historical gap created by the conflict he had been forced into as a child.
His entire professional life became a testament to reconciliation.
And Peyton and Theo remained family for decades.
Oh, absolutely. Peyton attended Theo's wedding, the births of his children. He remained the central guiding figure.
And Peyton's final letter to Theo, which was found after Peyton's death, it contained the ultimate release.
He wrote, "You don't owe me anything. You repaid the debt to yourself. You simply took the chance we offered and built something beautiful with it."
Wow.
And Theo shared his ultimate realization with his son, Michael, standing in that field 30 years later. This is where he learned that kindness was more powerful than hatred.
And that enemies, through mutual respect and grace, could fundamentally become friends.
Peyton's simple decision to see a child rather than a target, it saved their lives, it restored their dignity, and it defined their futures as agents of anti-hatred.
It is an incredible study in moral courage. I mean, the regulations define those boys as targets, as enemies to be neutralized or processed.
But Peyton chose to see them as human beings who deserve dignity, safety, and a choice.
His decision was the catalyst for their transformation. It ensured they wouldn't carry the poison of fascist ideology or the trauma of the war into the next generation.
And that transformation, that conscious choice to build a better life, it took immense internal effort. Theo's son once quoted Grandpa Peyton, who said, "It took more courage to change than to stay the same."
So if we consider the magnitude of courage required in that field, you have Peyton defying military law and risking his career to offer a single plate of fried chicken. Or you have the boys rejecting the lifelong indoctrination that told them accepting the food meant accepting the enemy's manipulation. What stands out to you as the most profound act of courage in this entire deep dive? Was it the radical act of offering food, or was it the deeply personal, world-shattering act of choosing to eat it?